This episode of the Quest for Quality podcast is brought to you by Thrive Market. Thrive Market is on a mission to make healthy living easy and affordable for everyone. To receive a special discount code for 15% off of your first order, email Tim at inboundpodcasting.com. Welcome to the Quest for Quality podcast with keynote speaker Joe Higgins.
In terms of Quest for Quality, this is really about living a quality life, having a quality career. If you always aim for quality in your life, you will almost always find success at some point in the longer term.
For decades, Joe has shared his quest for quality message with thousands of business professionals across the country.
Some of you may know our keynote speaker. I would tell you he's a legend in the industry, and it's great to see him back with us.
I've had the privilege and honor introducing some very famous speakers to you. They were all great speakers and showed you how a winning attitude brings success. But our next speaker is even better. Joe Higgins has walked in our shoes. Joe's the only speaker in our history that we've invited to talk to us 2 years in a row.
The Quest for Quality podcast presents a universal message under the umbrella of 4 areas of Joe's unprecedented experience and expertise. Leadership, building healthy teams, customer service, understanding the American economy.
I'm trying to let people get that message that it's taken me 40 years to learn. I've had a lot of experience. I've gone through major levels of an organization, have trained and worked with and supervised thousands of people over my career and created leaders at the Whirlpool Corporation today that are running the company. So hopefully what I bring here in this thing is allowing people to live a better life and a better quality of life.
Welcome back to the Quest for Quality with Joe podcast. I'm Tim Edwards, the founder of the Inbound Podcasting Network, featuring retired Whirlpool executive and keynote speaker, Joe Higgins. Joe travels the country as a consultant and pursues his passion as a keynote speaker at conventions and company meetings on topics such as leadership, creating a high-performance culture, cultivating superior customer service, building healthy teams, and the topic we're about to begin a 4-part series with here in the Quest for Quality podcast, the state and future of the American economy. Now, Joe, before we begin, we need to qualify you to our audience as not someone who simply spouts off his opinions on this complicated and delicate subject, but first and foremost, you're an economist, and you base the information that you present off of a multitude of credible sources and not what you see on TV or maybe read in your Facebook feed. That's right.
Yeah. And I think I said before, I get about 22 different publications from, as diverse places as Citibank, from the Stanford School of Business, the Wharton School of Business. I get them from National Association of Home Builders. I get 22 of them. And when I do my presentations, they have to be updated every single day because I can't get in front of an audience on a Wednesday if the following day there was some big thing in the economy. So they get updated every day, and it's based on research and hard numbers. There's no opinion in the presentations that I give.
So tell me, Joe, the benefit of people hearing this message.
Well, first of all, let me take you back. I've been speaking about the economy with my teams at Whirlpool Corporation literally for 20 or 30 years. And the reason why we do that is every year we would set quotas for our salespeople. And in order for them to understand their quotas, it was always important for them to understand what kind of help were they going to get from the economy. And so I made it my job as the leader of that organization to inform them of where the economy was going to be in the next 12 months. Same way at conventions or other corporations or even small businesses. If you're going to project out your next year, you want to know what's going to happen and not what you hear on television, because television's entertainment. And the work that I do is not entertainment. It's about real hard numbers. And I take that information and I tell people what their next 12 months is going to look like. I've also projected 10 years. I'm probably one of the few economists in America that would project out more than 3 months, because most economists get it wrong. Because economics is not a science, and you never can hit anything 100%, because things like Hurricane Sandy or 9/11 or even what we saw recently in France with the terrorism, they can change the numbers almost overnight. And a generation has seen that now with 9/11. But for the most part, if you do the work that I do, you can come pretty close to hitting where the economy is going to be. In other words, I can tell you whether there's going to be a recession or not based on the numbers that I'm seeing, and that's the important part of it.
So going back to the recession of 2008, were you able to predict what was about to take place at that time?
Well, yeah, actually, I'd been watching that since about 2004. At the time I was at Whirlpool, one of my responsibilities was running what we called the contract side or the builder business. And I had a lot of friends who were, big national home builders. I had made friends with presidents and vice presidents of these companies. They were seeing at that time the fact that there were a lot of what we would consider to be irresponsible loans going out. People that had no income, people that were lying about their income. There were no background checks. People were just given loans that turned into this disaster in 2008. Mortgage-backed securities were being sold on the market. They were worthless, and they were being sold. And that's what created the recession in 2008. We saw that beginning in around 2004. It escalated into 2006, and then it culminated on, I think it was September 23rd, 2008. And you may remember this time, Tim, when George Bush, Ben Bernanke, and Hank Paulson came in front of the American people. It was on a Wednesday. And they said at that time that if we don't make changes today, that was September 23rd, if we don't make changes today, the whole economy is going to collapse by this weekend. That's what happened. And the economy didn't collapse. You may remember that John McCain suspended his presidential campaign and rushed back to Washington. I'll tell you what, from where I stood at that time watching that, it gave me a pain in my stomach to hear those words and see what he said. Because Bush said at that time, and you can Google this presentation, you can even watch it on video online.
We'll include those links in our show notes here, so
Great.
Our listeners can go ahead and just click over and take a look at that.
Yeah, absolutely. And he said at that time that we were facing a major recession in America. He talked about a possible run on the banks. Well, none of that happened. But let me take you back to that time. Let me give you some historical perspective, and so people can understand kind of where we were. If you go back to that period, right after he spoke, we saw economists predicting that unemployment in America was going to reach 25%. Well, we haven't seen that since the Great Depression. 1933, the economy hit 25% unemployment, and they were predicting that. That didn't happen. We actually ended up around 10.2%, I think, at the high point in November of 2010. We saw consumer confidence drop to its lowest level since we've been measuring it since 1971. It dropped to like 34. The index dropped to 34. That was unprecedented. It was unheard of. We never saw anything like that. Consumer spending dropped dramatically. Revolving credit. People stopped using credit entirely. If you remember unemployment, there was a point where every day in the newspaper, you'd read an article about 5,000 people being laid off or 10,000. I remember there was one bank, I believe, that laid off 30,000 people. In November, December, and January, 2008-09, nearly 3 million people in America lost their jobs. We had like 700,000 in November, almost 900,000 in December, and another 850,000 in January. It was an amazing period in U.S. history. And I saw it coming. I don't think anybody could have predicted what really happened, but what happened was the deepest financial recession in U.S. history. There was one point where gross domestic product, which is the amount of goods and services we produce in a year in America, it dropped 9.7% in Q4 of 2008. That was the second worst drop in U.S. history. Well, let me back up a second. When I say U.S. history, from an economist point of view, anything prior to 1948 is pretty much an estimate. Anything after 1948 is where we know the real numbers.
Why 1948?
Well, it was after the war, and prior to that, we didn't have computers or really any way to really measure it. We estimated it. Mm-hmm. So when I say GDP dropped to the second worst level since we've been measuring it, that's from 1948. Dropped 9.7%. In Q1 of 2009, it dropped 5.7%. We had two of the four worst quarters in U.S. history back to back during that period. It was unprecedented. We've never seen a period like that. In our lifetimes anyway, and we probably never will again, hopefully. So from a historical point of view, it was a very, very devastating recession. We're still climbing out of what happened during that period, but we've made great progress. And every single year we have gone uphill. We've made slight progress all along until today. This is 2015, and I believe this is the beginning of a next cycle, 10-year cycle in America that's going to be good for this country.
So let's back up a little bit, though. So have Americans learned from what took place in 2008? Have you seen changes?
Well, I'd say this about economics is that we never really learn. We go right back to the bad habits right after we've come out of a recession. That's why we've had booms and busts really since 1929, and we see them quite often in American history. But banks, there were some regulations put on banks where they couldn't do these kinds of loans. The mortgage-backed securities were tightened up a little bit. So some of the regulations have changed. I think that's been positive. The whole banking industry is pushing really hard to have those taken off so that they have no restrictions. And I think we all know that once that happens, they'll go right back to what they were doing in 2004 through 2006 that created the 2008 crash. But Americans today are doing better. If you go back to 2004, 5, 6, 7, in that period, we were living at 160% of disposable income. That means if you made $100,000, you were spending $160,000. Pretty devastating. And the reason why that was happening and why it could happen, because you wonder, well, where do people get the money to live like that? Well, they were based on credit, but they also were pulling massive amounts of equity out of homes. And so when housing crashed in '08, it really crashed because everybody was underwater because they had taken out second mortgages. They had spent that money on vacation trips to Europe and on Mercedes-Benzes or whatever. And that money was gone. And when the crash came, well, then they were underwater and they either lost their homes through foreclosure or they're still struggling to pay off the homes that they've, against the borrowing that they did at that time. That was a devastating time.
So almost 7 years since that time. And you say here at 2015 that we are now on the cusp of a resurgence.
Oh, well, for sure. I mean, we've seen that just this year alone. If you look at quarters 2 and 3 so far this year, GDP is up 4.6% in Q2 and 5% in Q3. So that for me marks the beginning, I think, of the next 10-year cycle. And I'd been predicting that really since 2009 or so when we began looking at this. As we came out of this is around when it would happen. Now, Q1 of this year of 2014 was not a good quarter because we had the polar vortex, which froze everything from Kansas City to the Atlantic Ocean. And people literally, if you knew people back east at that time, they couldn't even go out of their homes. I was in Milwaukee speaking at a convention, and the taxi cab that took me to the airport, he said that they had 55 months in Milwaukee of below zero temperatures during last winter. That killed the first quarter. But if you throw that out and you look at Q2 and Q3, and we don't have the results for Q4 yet, we had an excellent quarter. So yeah, we're on the way. Consumer confidence, which I said had reached the lowest point in 2008 at 34, the index is now 92, which is not the highest point we've ever been at, but it is a 60-point difference from where we were in 2008. And we say a fully functioning economy kind of runs around at 90. So we're already at 92, and it's been an upward trend really for this whole year. So that's very positive news. See, all the numbers that I talk about and that we might talk about here in this program don't really mean a whole lot to most Americans. It's how you feel about the numbers. And if you feel good about the numbers, positive about the numbers, then you're apt to spend your money on things which drives consumer spending, and consumer spending drives gross domestic product. And if gross domestic product is up, that means probably that we're going to have a pretty good year, and you're feeling it if you have an independent business anywhere in the country.
So can we make those numbers available to our audience? Those same resources that you use to look at this situation where we are with the American economy and go, hey, guess what, folks? It's really not that bad, and here's an upswing here. They might not be able to look at the numbers with the same eyes that you have with your education and your experience, but is there somewhere somebody can go to absorb those numbers and come up with the same conclusion? Or are they relying solely on what they're hearing on various news networks?
Yeah, unfortunately, you have to go to a lot of different websites. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example, they do unemployment. We have different organizations in America that come up with different things. Like the Conference Board does consumer spending. The Thomson Reuters University of Michigan poll does consumer confidence. It's not easy to get this kind of work. I think one of the reasons why people like me at conventions is that I do hours and hours of research, and in 1 hour they get all that in front of them, and they can go out and make decisions based on where they think their world's going to go. So it's not easy to get. You can subscribe to periodicals that I do to get this information, but I rely on more than one because no one organization is going to get it right in any given year. And so I like to look at a mix and triangulate my information, and I think I come up with a better result that way.
So Joe, how did this recession in 2008 affect the stock market?
Well, let me take you back to March 9th, 2009. That was the day that the stock market, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, reached 6546, I believe, some number like that. 6547, I think, was the number. So on March 9th at 3 o'clock in New York City, that's what happened. And I can tell you that March 9th, 2009, as I sit there and watch that, for someone that was looking forward to retirement, that has a portfolio of stocks, that day hit me really hard. And I thought, wow, this thing could either go further than that and the whole country could collapse, or it's going to recover. Since that time, since March 9th, we've seen steady growth in the stock market for the last 6 years. We've gone from 66, 46 to just at the end of this year, 2014, we saw the Dow close above 18,000. Now it's been below that in the first part of this year in 2015. It's also didn't close at the end of the year at that level, but in late December, it closed above 18,000. A lot of people thought that was unheard of, that it couldn't happen. We've seen a rise in the stock market of 172% during that period. I have friends of mine that had 401ks. And, a lot of people in America today have 401ks. I always joke about the fact that your 401k became a 201k or a 101k because of the crash of the stock market. People were really depressed. I had one friend that he said, every time I get my quarterly statement in the mail, I just throw it in the trash. I can't bear to look at it because I get so depressed. Well, now, as a result of what's happened in the last 6 years, your 401k is now an 801k or a 901k. You're doing better than ever before. The market has had a remarkable recovery, and we've seen earnings as best they've been in many, many years. So corporations have been profitable. They've had very strong profitability during this period, and so the market's come back. And every year it's grown a little bit. I think that this year, as I look out in 2015, I'm predicting that it's going to be up another almost 6%. So I think we're going to have another good year in the face of one of the longest bull market runs in U.S. history. Pundits were saying it was impossible. Matter of fact, Tim, when I stood on stage just a couple of years ago talking about this in Orlando, I remember I was at a convention in Orlando, Florida, and I was talking about the fact that I believed the market was going to be up like 15% that year. I think that was in 2013. People thought I was crazy. They came up to me and said, "There's no way that's even possible." Well, the Dow actually came in twice that. It came in at 29%, and the NASDAQ came in at 38%. And I think a lot of Americans don't realize, because most of them pulled out after 2008, how strong the markets has been. And normally the stock market is a predictor of where we're going. If the market's moving forward, because money flows kind of to where the market's going. And if the market's going up, it means that business conditions are probably improving and looking better. And I think that's where we're going over the next few years.
Well, what about one specific industry? You talked about 2008, and the banks were giving out loans to everybody who wanted one. Of course, there was a lot of defaulting on those loans. And the home building industry, have they bounced back?
Yeah, the home building industry is one of the most important industries in America. There are hundreds of thousands of jobs. It's a huge sector in the U.S. economy, and we rely on it. If I take you back to 2006, 2007, during that period, we built over 2 million living units in America. That was our highest level we'd ever seen before. Now, a lot of that was based on speculation, where people were just buying homes. I had friends that were buying homes in Arizona because they were going up so fast, and there was a lot of that going on in this country. But when the recession hit and these mortgage-backed securities turned out to be worthless, and people started, going into foreclosure, and banks started kicking people out of their homes and stuff, it really affected the industry. Matter of fact, you may remember there was a point where you could drive around and you'd see shells of homes on lots where people just walked away from jobs, and that's what happened. By 2009, it had gone from building 2 million homes in America to under 500,000. And for anybody in a business connected to home building, it was devastating. They were disproportionately hurt by this recession beyond what anybody else did. Now, we saw some life in the home building industry around 2012, when the stock prices started to go up and people started to realize that there was some more interest in buying homes again. And then by 2012, 2013, we saw some pretty good resurgence. We built 1 million homes last year. And I think we'll build a little over 1 million this year as well. And my friends in the home building industry feel that 1 million, 1 million, that's sustainable really over the next 5 years. And that's good for America. When you think about the fact that we went from building over 2 million to under 500,000, you can only imagine how devastating that is to all the different parts of our world that touch housing. I mean, think of Home Depot. Think of everything in that store that gets affected when we stop building 1.5 million homes. And that's what happened. And the other issue to that is that we had kids who really are living in the back rooms of their parents' homes today because they got out of school, they didn't get jobs, they had a lot of consumer debt, they couldn't buy housing. And so that affected us. But we're now on the verge, and a lot of the predictions are between now and 2018 or so, the millennials who have been living in back rooms are going to be getting married and starting families, and they'll be buying homes. So once we get to 2019, 2020, we'll see a surge in homes when millennials start buying beginning homes. And that'll change really another direction in America in terms of home building. So I see a very strong market between now and really in 2025, the decade ahead, which I've been talking about for many years.
Well, that certainly is refreshing news. Thanks, Joe. Up next in the Quest for Quality with Joe podcast, we'll continue our series with the state and future of the American economy. Joe discusses the health of the GDP, the housing market, and the differences between the unemployment rate and the real unemployment rate. We'll also discuss some of the myths surrounding our national debt. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast to make sure that you don't miss a single episode. As soon as we post each and every episode, you'll find it right there in your playlist on your computer or your mobile devices. And if you're interested in contacting Joe Higgins to speak to your organization or convention regarding the current state and future of the American economy, or some of the other topics such as building high-performance cultures, building healthy teams, customer service, and leadership, just click on over to www.q4qwithjoe.com. That's the letter Q, the number 4, the letter Q with Joe.com. Hit the Request Joe button, fill out the form, and Joe will get right back to you. If you have a question or comment for Joe, we sure would love to hear from you. You can record a voice memo on your phone and send it to tim@inboundpodcasting.com. Or you can even give us a call and leave a message at 888-983-5020 extension 2. That's 888-983-5020 extension 2. All feedback is welcome. Thanks again for listening in, and we'll catch you next time for another edition of the Quest for Quality with Joe podcast. For Joe Higgins, I'm Tim Edwards with the Inbound Podcasting Network.